All right, we all set? We've got CNN recording us today, but it's not live streamed, just FYI. Good morning, I'm Linda Feldman, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is the well-known public intellectual, progressive activist, and now independent candidate for president, Dr. Cornel West. This is his first appearance at a Monitor breakfast, so welcome. Dr. West was educated at Harvard and Princeton and was a professor at both, with appointments in philosophy, theology, African American studies. Currently, Dr. West holds the title of Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at Union Theological Seminary and is a professor of philosophy and Christian practice. He's also the author of 20 books, including Race Matters, Democracy Matters, and a memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. Now, Dr. West is on his first run for the presidency, and we're eager to hear what you have to say. So again, thank you for coming. First, the ground rules. We're on the record here. Please no live blogging or tweeting, and in short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. And then once the session ends at 10 o'clock, there's no embargo. And we will email, my colleague Troy is going to take some photos, and we can email them after the event concludes. And as many of you know, if you'd like to ask a question, just send me a signal, and I'll call on as many as time permits. Now, Dr. West, if you'd like to make brief opening remarks,
Sure,
the floor is yours.
Sure,
maybe 5 or 6 minutes?
About 5 or 6 minutes?
Right.
Well, I want to begin just by thanking my dear sister Linda's put in high-quality time at Christian Science Monitor. Oh, I'm so fine. I'm fine, my brother. Sure. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Did anybody else get free? You all right? Oh, that's right. Oh, you just bring it out? Oh, I thought you already ate. But I'm blessed to be here. Look forward to learning and listening. When I think of Christian Science Monitor, founded in 1908, I think of Mary Baker Eddy, concerned with all the different attacks and lies she had, McClure's Magazine and others going at her for 2 years before she died. She said, I want to leave a rich legacy. And it's amazing now when you think about it. It was 100 and what?
Since the founding of the Monitor?
15 years,
yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
See, that's really quite extraordinary. It really is. But I want to begin really with just a letter that reflects, for me, what we need when we think of the spirit of American politics. I really believe that we're living in an empire undergoing profound spiritual decay and moral decadence, which is to say, unbelievable callousness and indifference toward the suffering, especially of the vulnerable, with increasing tribalism, the difficulty of trying to look at the world through the lens of someone else who is looking at it through a different lens. But there's a wonderful letter that the great Henry James wrote to the less great Robert Louis Stevenson, January 12, 1901, where he says, no theory is kind to us that cheats us of seeing. No theory is kind to us that cheats us of seeing. And I think what Henry James was trying to say is that if we don't have an intellectual humility and a human sense of fallibility when we enter public space, then we're going to end up with forms of very narrow parochialism, narrow dogmatism, and narrow provincialism. And I think part of the polarization and gangsterization that we see in our culture and our politics has to do with the collapse of a civic sense of being a human being and citizen in the empire. We can just call it a civic breakdown, and we're near civic collapse. And we know that's the making of what fascism is all about. That's the making of anti-democratic ways of being in the life, of being in the world, and non-democratic modes of existence. And I think I don't want to be too alarmist, but I do think that this is one of the most dangerous moments in the history of a very fragile experiment in America called the USA, given its imperial backdrop of indigenous peoples and 800 military units around the world, and some special operations in almost 100 countries. And so I just want to begin with that note. What this campaign is very much about is trying to reintroduce America to the best of itself. That we have some great peoples, we have some great practices, we have some great traditions that we need to go back to, not to imitate or emulate, but to build on and reconstruct. And I've always viewed myself as just a very small wave in a great ocean. And that ocean has to do with tradition of folks who came before, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Rabbi Heschels, the Edward Zaids, the Dorothy Days, and one can go on and on and on in this regard. And usually they're persons who do not become a part of the electoral political system. I come out of a context of social movement. So I've come out of a context of waves of moral and spiritual awakenings that focus on poor people and working people, that focus on those who have been subjugated and degraded and demeaned. And this is not cheap PC chit-chat. We're talking about precious human beings who were viciously attacked, be they indigenous peoples, who were viciously enslaved, be they my own folk, black folk, who were subjugated, be they workers of any color, by greedy bosses, who were marginalized, be they the vast majority of the country, who have been women of all colors, with ugly patriarchal practices, or homophobia, transphobia, or the anti-Catholicism that is integral and constitutive of the early Protestant USA, or the very ugly, ugly forms of anti-Jewish hatred and sentiment, which goes hand in hand with every Christian civilization we've known going back to Jesus himself. And I speak as a Christian, so I'm very, very sensitive to the anti-Jewish tradition of Christian civilizations. And we see it in Islamic civilizations too, in terms of their characterization of those who are degraded others. So I start with that sensibility, that spirit. And how do we get beyond the anger, the hatred, the revenge? How do we talk about truth, justice, love? Very old school, very old-fashioned. I'm upfront about that. I come out of the Socratic legacy of Athens and the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem, dipped in the chocolate side of the American empire. Enslaved, Jim Crow, hated, terrorized, traumatized black people, but with universal vision, embracing everybody, not just in America, but around the world. Latin America, Europe, Middle East, and so on.
All right, wonderful. You've put a lot on the table there. So I'm going to ask you a very practical question and then ask you about something you just talked about. First, so this is your first run for president.
That's right.
And as best I can tell, you have a very small operation. You're no longer affiliated with a party. So first, why did you leave the Green Party and its established ability to get on the ballot? How much money have you raised? How, tell me about your organization, and are you at all concerned that if you are able to get on the ballot in a significant number of states, that you could potentially help re-elect Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, at this point, I'm just trying to bear witness and trying to do what I can do. I'm trying to convince those who are thinking about voting for Trump to vote for me. And I'm spending some good time in Trump country because I'm convinced that there's a lot of people who voted for Trump who are not diehard Trumpists. They're just deeply disillusioned with the Democratic Party. They see no alternative in that regard. But I don't go in thinking about whether I'm helping or hurting someone else. I go in with my own fallible and humble sense of trying to hold on to whatever integrity, honesty, and decency I can bear witness to in light of the problems that I was talking about, decay and decline and so forth. But I've got a magnificent team. For the first time, I think, in the history of American presidential politics, we've got a quartet. We're very jazz-like in that sense. One is right there in the back, my dear brother Anthony. We've got Sister Madeline. We've got Sister Kiana. We've got Brother Edwin. And then we've got Brother Brandon here, who's part of the core team. And we got a whole host of Rose and Stanley, my own beloved wife, Anahita. So that we are on the move. We're already on the ballot in Alaska. We're on the movement. Just in Utah, nearing signatures procured. As you know, you can't really begin until the new year because most of the states do not allow one to begin the process of ballot access with signatures until January, February. But we're on the move. We've got low-hanging fruit, which means we can get about 15 to 20 states. See, the Green Party, God bless them, they were kind to me. They had 17 states automatically. And that was one of my motivations to have those 17 automatic. But I found out that it was just too difficult to work with the Green Party. It's hard to be a jazz man in a party band. And they had all these different requirements, and you had to have internal dialogues with the presidential candidates. They had 6 other candidates, separate debates, and you had to go to the various state meetings and so forth. I wanted to go directly, as we are doing, directly to our precious citizens, to speak to them, to try to get them to see there is an alternative to the two-party system. Both parties are captured by corporate power. Both parties more and more, not just money-driven, but are manipulating what I call the hounds of hell. I don't call it that. It comes from Howard Thurman's great book, Jesus Under Discernment. What are the hounds of hell? Greed, hatred, fear. And too much of American life is organized greed, corporate power out of control, institutionalized hatred, reinforcing the ugly tribalisms, and then the fear. And in fear, we know is shot through each and every one of us, just like hatred and greed is shot through each and every one of us. But when those become the predominant themes, motifs of a society or of an empire, you can rest assured that decay and dissolution is setting in.
So now a substance question.
Right.
So if you were the president of a major university and were asked at a public hearing, the Elise Stefanik question, how would you have responded? So just as a reminder, here's what she asked the 3 university presidents. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your campus bullying and harassment policies?
Well, first, I'd put it in, I'd lay out background conditions. I would say, as president, I am fundamentally committed in a non-negotiable way to the respect of each and every student, no matter who they are. In any language that would lead toward their sense of being violated as human beings with dignity, I'd be willing to put forward policies to ensure that they're being treated fairly and they're being treated with dignity. Very much so.
Would there be any sanctions, though, against people on campus calling for the genocide of Jews?
Well, there'd be some kind of move toward disciplinary process. You can't dictate, and you can't be the judge and executioner at the same time. Not at all. But I would go further too. You see, as president, there was a time, before our universities became so corporatized and commodified. It's just sad to see how these big donors and these big benefactors more and more are dictating what the content and character of education is. I mean, that to me is just a form of intellectual vulgarity. It's not moral bankruptcy. But I would say also, as a president of a university, right, that our Jewish students just as precious as our Palestinian students. Our Palestinian students just as precious as our black students. Black students just as precious as our white Catholic students. On and on and on. I wouldn't just say it, wouldn't be lip service. I would mean it. I would mean it, so that there would be what Jane Austen called constancy of magnificent novels. Constancy. What is that? Moral consistency. But the last thing I would say is that in the midst of actual genocidal attacks on Palestinians in Gaza that are concerned with any students, including Jewish students, who are potentially rendered unsafe or feeling offended with language, is a concern, but it ought to be juxtaposed with a more fundamental concern, which is massacre, which is murder. And so to have a Congress, for example, that is enabling that kind of massive murder, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And even when you hear the talk about Amalek, we know who Amalek was in the 15th chapter of Samuel, the 3rd verse. What? Genocide. Killing every child, every woman, every man. That's what we've heard from Nathan now from the Prime Minister of Israel, right? In that context, we say to our students, we want you to be able to do a number of things at the same time. We want you to respect Jewish students such that you ensure that they can enter public space and be respected. And we also want the campus to recognize that what's going on in the world right now concretely are vicious attacks, just like the vicious attacks of Hamas vis-a-vis the Israelis. Citizens, we need to focus on these vicious attacks that are concrete, not just the speech acts, which are important, which we have to have ways in which we respect each other, but I think it's a double standard, and I think it's a form of hypocrisy even, that we end up spending so much time talking about speech acts in regard to genocide. And actual concrete genocidal attacks are taking place, enabled by the U.S. government, and we don't have a serious public conversation about it. That just strikes me as just morally obscene, really. And I can imagine what Martin King would say if he were here, and he's always for me the benchmark.
Okay, Nadine Epstein from Moment Magazine.
Absolutely.
So, as president, what would your policy be on anti-Semitism in the United States, and also what would your Israel policy be?
Well, one is that I would always view anti-Jewish hatred or anti-Semitism, if you characterize it, as part and parcel of any kind of racism. And racism is morally an evil, an abomination, and it is, when enacted, criminalized across the board. And any time we talked about xenophobia, it would be always juxtaposed with these various forms of racism, all of them having the same moral status, the same moral standing, as it were, you see. So, because what you don't want, what I don't like when I hear my precious Jewish students saying, well, you talk about racism against Latinos or racism against blacks. When there's racism against Jews, it has less moral value. You see, I have no patience with that. We've got to be universalistic across the board. Now, when it comes to policy against Israel itself, I would want to have a serious public conversation about the role of the Israeli occupation losing sight of the humanity of Palestinians. So at this moment, it would not just be ceasefire, it would not just be end the siege, but the end of the occupation, and how do we move forward to ensure that a Palestinian baby has the same value as a Jewish baby, that in fact there ought to be Jewish and Palestinian equal dignity, equal rights, and equal self-determination.
Do you believe in a two-state solution?
I think the two-state solution is now far gone. I once did. I think it's far gone. I think with the 750,000 settlements, it's impossible to conceive of. It's a very, very sad affair that I recall back in the 80s. So many of us were fighting for that. Of course, in those days, the call for a Palestinian state meant you were anti-Semite. That you were pushed to the margins. Edward Said and I used to march outside of the New York Times just trying to get them to use the word occupation. It was disputed territories. They thought somehow we were being paid by some Arab. No, we're just trying to tell the truth about the nature of the relation. You got Jewish folk who've been terrorized, traumatized, and hated for 2,000 years and still going, intensifying, increased. But then they jump out of the burning buildings of Europe owing to the vicious hatred of gangsters, Nazis, and others, and they come to a place where there are other people. And so they end up underdog mentality, tied to the United States, top dog status, with Arab countries that continually generating various kinds of threats against them, understandably paranoid, understandably insecure. What for me is non-negotiable is Jewish safety and Jewish security alongside Palestinian safety, Palestinian security. And so that so concrete policy would be, how do we generate conditions such that we call for the end of the occupation? And then how do we creatively come together to see how Jews and Palestinians can live together in that land? If the choice is between a apartheid-like rule over Palestinians versus a secular state, with the two-state solution gone, how do you proceed? That's where I think we are right now.
So at this point, you're just asking the question, and you don't have a
no, I don't think anybody.
Nobody
has a definitive answer to that. We've got to just, how do we create a social arrangement where Jewish brothers and sisters feel safe and secure? And they cannot feel safe and secure ever if they're dominated and occupying a people, because it continually is going to be Hamas-like groups produced.
But Israel should exist still.
Well, the thing is, if you move toward a secular state, then a Jewish state or a Jewish supremacist state is no longer part of the process.
So no more Israel.
Well, it wouldn't be no more Israel, because any subsequent state in that area would have to build on the very rich democratic practices that the Jewish state was able to enact. But it would no longer be a state in which non-Jewish persons were second or third class citizens. You see, so that we'd have to look for a new generation of Jewish leadership. And we're already seeing it in the United States, believe me. I mean, if not now, and you got a whole wave of young Jewish folk who are saying, there cannot be Jewish security based on the subordination of another people. We've got to be creative. We saw this in South Africa and other places around the world. You see. So that the very thing that the Jewish state was supposed to deliver, which I'm deeply committed to, which is Jewish safety and Jewish security, how is that incorporated in a process that goes beyond occupation, beyond apartheid-like conditions, beyond segregation, and you have to then have a wave of Palestinian leadership, you see. So Hamas itself is not committed to democratic practices at all. It's an Islamic, xenophobic organization, patriarchal and so forth. At the moment, it has the expression of Palestinian resistance, but Hamas itself is not going to be part of that process. They would have to undergo fundamental transformation to be part of a democratic process. And of course, this is true for the right wing of Zionists in Israel too, who have no commitment like Hamas. They have no commitment to any kind of mutual living together, let alone a two-state solution as we see. So that right now we're in a moment of unbelievable flux, as we're in a moment of unbelievable barbarity.
All right. Juliana Schäuble from Tagesspiegel.
Sure. From Germany. It's a blessing to have a German sister here.
You said we are living in one of the most dangerous moments in American history, and you warned against fascism. But your run might enable Donald Trump to beat Joe Biden. Why is Joe Biden the wrong president?
You know, the sad reality is, I travel the country and I meet so many magnificent human beings in the American empire, all colors, all genders, all sexual orientations, all religious and non-religious identities. And when we get to our leaders, especially at the presidential level, it's just amazing to see the hemorrhaging that takes place. You see, to me, Brother Donald Trump is a bona fide gangster and a neo-fascist. He's been that for a long time. So I understand the fears. You see, Brother Biden has a military adventurism as part and parcel of his past and present. So we end up with two candidates. For me, both beneath mediocrity, even though Biden's got some positive features that Trump doesn't have. But Trump's bar is so low. We got one who's pushing us toward a second civil war at home, and the other is pushing us toward a World War III abroad. That's the choice that the American society dishes out at this crucial historical moment. That's the only choice we have. You see? That's what upsets me. That's what brings tears to my eyes in terms of the best of America being completely obliterated. Because neither one of them represent anywhere near the best whatsoever. And so that in that sense, I raise my voice. And of course, as a jazz man, I've got to be improvisational. I can't be dogmatic either. In a moment of flux, I'm thoroughly convinced that Biden may very well do an LBJ, have his LBJ moment and decide he's not going to do it. If you got Brother Axelrod and some other Democrats, and if Axelrod's saying that, that's probably Brother Obama in the background saying that. How long is he going to last? Is Trump actually going to be the candidate? He might be either on his way to jail or overwhelmed. It's hard to say. Now, what does the B team look like? Well, here comes Cal. How you doing? I didn't get a chance to meet you.
Eva from CNN. So nice to meet you in person.
Yeah. You see it? Yeah, absolutely. What does the B team look like? Here comes Gavin. Well, hard to say. Here comes Kamala. Hard to say. Who's the B team for Republicans? Nikki, Haley. Let's go at it. Let's have debates. Let's have contestation in public life. See which way the country moves. It's hard to say. So that I don't think that what I'm doing is in any way aiding the triumph of fascism. I think I'm trying to give voice to some of the most crucial anti-fascist voices, figures, movements in the culture. And I can say this, too, that if the only alternative to fascism is in America is a milquetoast neoliberalism at home and a military adventurism abroad, America will go fascist anyway. Because there's no way that you can have a democratic caretaker administration without the oscillation. Sooner or later, the American public will choose one or the other. And as long as Tina, to use the language of Margaret Thatcher, and God bless her, but I was not a fan of Margaret Thatcher, but she used to tell, there is no alternative. Tina, there's no alternative. As long as the American people believe there's no alternative whatsoever, then it's going to oscillate to fascism sooner or later. Because Trumpism is here to stay, even without Trump. That's the depth of the frustration. That's the depth of the spiritual decay that we're dealing with, you see. And so, yes, we're in a very, very, very Beckett-like situation, what Samuel Beckett called the mess. That's what he saw, the mess, the greed, the hatred. How do you deal with that? How do you generate a way out?
Jim Puzangara from the Boston Globe.
Absolutely.
Straight ahead.
Absolutely.
I wanted to follow up on your answer about the testimony of the university presidents before Congress. Do you think the answers that they gave should cost them their jobs? And what do you think of the decision that your former institution, Harvard, support President Claudia Gay and not force her to resign because of that?
No, I thought that their answers were weak. And I think they were weak in part because we no longer have university presidents who speak with the moral clarity and the kind of passion required. You could just see the tutoring from the lawyerly consultants that they had. We won't mention any names, but Wilbur had. You could just see the training, the shaping that they had that didn't allow them to speak what's on their hearts and minds and souls. What would Charles Eliot have said? I know he's racist, anti-Jewish, but he was a serious wasp, president of Harvard. This is what I think. then he may have invoked Homer, or he may have invoked Sophocles or something. We don't have presidents like that anymore. The corporatized, commodified universities have lawyerly persons who, when asked clear questions, are actually lawyerly in the sense of sophistry. In Athens, Greek. You can go either way. No. Say what you say. Say your defense of Jewish students. Be honest about it. But be honest, you're in the defense of Palestinian students. Do you agree with the dissolution of students for justice in Palestine and Colombia, the disbanding of them and so forth? Say what you believe. We don't get that anymore. That's sad. That's sad. Even if it's conservative, be honest about it. Yeah, that's what I love about my dear brother Robbie George. We travel all the country for 20 years. He says what he means what he says. When he's right, he's right. When he's wrong, he's wrong. He's got a right to be wrong and so forth. And that's why we see my brother in so many a deeper way. But that's what we need. And American people are hungry and thirsty for that. Should that lead toward them having their job, losing their jobs? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Since when can you have a donors and benefactors get together and dictate who's president of major institutions, let alone these ruling class institutions like Harvard and Penn and so forth? My God, what kind of vulgarity are we talking about? What happened to robust discourse? What happened to giving money to universities but allowing faculty and those persons involved in the shaping of those souls of young people to make the decisions pedagogically and who rules and who ought to be their president? This isn't Wall Street. This isn't Silicon Valley. This isn't hedge fund land. These are universities. They have a role and a function that's qualitatively different than hedge fund activities. But the mentalities of these donors and benefactors now has reached a point. And it's not just Jewish. It is a human U.S. phenomenon. In fact, it's taking place around the world. The corporatization and the commodification of education around the world. And that's part of predatory capitalist processes that have disproportionate impact on the shaping of deep issues of what it means to be human. What is the quest for truth and beauty and goodness and God and so forth and so on. And it's a very, it's sad, but we have to be very candid about it.
So even though you're highly critical of the way they answer those questions, you don't think it should cost them their jobs?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. They were just weak.
But is it okay to have a weak university president?
Well, I mean, when you look at the alternatives, I mean, whoever comes after will be even more fearful of the donors, more fearful of the benefactors and so forth. It's a larger issue in terms of, what the alternatives would be. But I think that just like the students themselves, the students can be wrong in various slogans they have and various formulations they have. Of course, it's supposed to be wrong. They're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. But you make them accountable. When you say this kind of thing, this is what we hear. That's why we're upset with it. You see? From the river to the sea. Many Jewish brothers and sisters hear annihilation. They got a right to raise that. Is that what you mean when you say from the rivers? No, we're not talking about Jewish annihilation. We're talking about Palestinians being able to flower and flourish. Right now, it's from the river to the sea. It's apartheid-like. Well, then have a conversation about it and let these Jewish brothers and sisters know, go to Hillel. We did that at Harvard when I was the faculty head of the Palestinian students. We'd go to Hillel. We'd bring the rabbis. Let's have a conversation about this. This is what we mean. And then you bring in a variety of different voices to it. This is what Noam Chomsky means. Has Noam Chomsky ever called for the annihilation of Jews? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, from the right-wing Jewish point of view, he might be a self-hating Jew. I think they're wrong, but people got a right to be wrong. But has he ever called for the... Not at all. Is that what Stanley Aronowitz meant? Is that what other Jewish voices? Is that what Jewish courage means? Is that what Judith Butler has in mind? Let's have a conversation. But engage the students. Have the Palestinian students sit here, the Jewish students sit here. Let the WASPs and the other folk come anytime they want. We're going to have a dialogue. This is Socratic action. That's what universities are all about, it seems to me.
So you agree with the Harvard decision to support President Gay?
Well, to not have her resign. But even there, I would raise questions, you see. Does the Harvard Corporation itself have the right motivations? If it's just a PR move, and it doesn't move toward substantive, robust conversation about complex issues that have to do with Jews and Palestinians, Israel and the Middle East and so forth, then even that's still superficial. You see the point I'm making?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry to give.
Yeah. No. This
but
is
no,
great.
these are very important, especially right there in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay, Jeff Earl from the Daily Mail.
Yes, indeed. Good to see you.
I wanted to get back, forgive me, to this Trump question. Because
Sure.
You described him as a neo-fascist.
Absolutely.
And so, and as you know, there's a long history of third-party and non-major party candidates. Eugene Debs, Jill Stein, got 1.5 million votes.
Yes.
So my question is, as you plot your campaign, how do you want to run it? Because the threshold to getting on the battleground is pretty low. I think you either went to or you're planning to go to Michigan.
Absolutely.
You could run a campaign where you go all in on Michigan and really just, there's some issues you could pick at there that might be successful. That, as you know, that might really take some votes away from Joe Biden. Is that the way you want to do it? Or do you want to just use this platform that you've got, push your ideas all over the country and then see what happens?
Well, see what happens. We had to unpack what we mean by that, see what happens.
Yeah.
We got to keep in mind, though, brother, that 38%, almost 40% of our precious fellow citizens don't vote at all. So much of our campaign is actually zeroing in on those that don't vote at all, especially young people. Especially young. Part of what this campaign is about is to convince young people that there are examples of persons who are concerned about public life having quality, moral and spiritual greatness rather than just upward mobility. And to see that in action in the flesh so that we can pass on the best of America to the younger generation. And what is it now? It's almost 70% of the young generation. Just push aside electoral politics as a whole. 62%, as you probably know, who did vote for a third-party independent candidate say they would never, ever vote for Republicans or Democrats. So you got a whole group, significant slice of fellow citizens who are just not in the mix when it comes to two parties at all. And I'm spending a lot of time with them. A lot of time.
Young voters are a part of the coalition that we can provide. So do you view that as a way to, is that low-hanging fruit for you to try to hit him with right now?
Well, I'm not hitting him, though. You see, I'm just trying to speak to issues. If he's speaking to those issues, I invite him to steal my thunder. Absolutely. This is what it's all about. Steal my thunder. I want to see what your policies look like. I call for the abolition of poverty, the abolition of homelessness. I call for strong living wages for workers and so forth and so on. Steal my thunder. Come on. Oh, we've been holding back, but we've got a major project that's going to eliminate most of these precious homeless brothers and sisters around the country. Beautiful. I applauded Biden when they cut child poverty in half, 50%. I gave him an ovation. Beautiful. Expiration sets in, it doubles in a few months. Where's the priority? Where's the follow-through? You see? So in that sense, this is part of what political discourse, is about. But it's got to be done in such a way that, even when I call Brother Trump a gangster, you see, I'm not saying it out of hatred of him at all, that he's a human being like anybody else. He chooses impunity. He chooses to degrade others with no accountability. Those are human choices. We all have the capacity for that. That's inside of each and every one of us. But we need to have a level of public conversation and discourse that can be intense and be honest and candid without it resulting in this vicious kind of tribalism and polarization. There's got to be ways that we can disagree and still acknowledge that we've got human connections, not just as Americans, but as human beings. And that's part of what the campaign is about, to be able to see that in action. That has an immeasurable and intangible impact on people. And it's not just political. There's a spiritual and a moral dimension to it. And that's a fundamental part of this campaign. Really.
To your right, Eva McCann from CNN.
Hi, how are you? Dr. West, thank you so much for sitting with us this morning. My question is less philosophical, really trying to get concrete specifics here. So take us into your strategy to get on the ballot in every state. Where are you starting? What does the ground operation look like? What's the first state where you might be able to get on the ballot? Walk us through sort of the practical aspects of your campaign.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We're on the ballot already in Alaska. Isn't that interesting, though?
Very interesting.
Black man like me starting with vanilla, Alaska. California, Sunshine Land. Alaska with the polar bears and the igloos. Wonderful human beings up there. Like wonderful human beings in every state. We're just in Utah. Already on the move. Because Utah was early and didn't know a lot. My dear brother RFK Jr. was very kind. What did he do? He went there and pushed January 8th to March. We were breaking our neck thinking it's January 8th. Thank you, Brother Kennedy. We appreciate that. Use your money. He's got millions of dollars. You had mentioned before, we made $250,000 the last quarter.
Mm-hmm.
We were very happy.
How much have you raised total?
Oh, Brother Anthony, what would it be total?
Just a little over $500,000 at this point.
Probably about $600,000.
And where is that primarily coming from?
It's everyday people. Of course, you got limits. We won't have any PACs. We won't have any corporate money. Even when some of the elites want to give money, I think they should be able to give. Harlan Crow and others want to give money, and Harlan Crow is somebody I've known, and they wanted me to give it back. I said, why should I give it back? He wants to give it, but no, we gave it back because the optics and so forth and so on. But people ought to have the right to be able to give that over $3,000. That John Mellencamp gave. Now, of course, I was very excited about that because I've known him for many years. We've done some records together. This record Jim Crow that we did together. But it's coming mainly from everyday people.
And so Alaska,
we got Alaska on, Utah we're on the move, and it doesn't begin until January. And we've got a number of states. There's some states you just have to pay $500. Louisiana, Tennessee, and others is $500 and $1,000. $6,000 signatures, so we should be able to do that pretty easy. But we've got, what is it now, Brother Anthony, about 14,000 volunteers?
It's up to 18,000.
Is it 18 now? See, I'm behind. 18,000 volunteers who are eager, ready to hit it. We just were endorsed by Operation Power. Brother Charles Barron and Inez Barron, one of the most progressive black organizations in New York. We've just endorsed with the Black Church Initiative with Brother Anthony Evans, and that's highly significant. But that's my own tradition. See, I come out of Shiloh Baptist Church, Ira B. West, Clifton West, the West household. That's what fundamentally shaped me at the deepest level is mom and dad at Shiloh. You see. And so when they come forward, that's highly significant because the black church has been commodified like any other institution in America.
I've spoken to some young voters who are considering third parties for the first time, who feel especially disillusioned because of the conflict. And so what is the strategy to specifically sort of mobilize those folks? So do you have like coalitions director for young voters? Like what's the plan to actually get that young voter in Michigan who voted for Biden last cycle, who is now entertaining third-party candidates?
No, we've got in our own arsenal a focus on truth and justice and love for every group, including young people. Including young people. And yes, indeed, we plan to be able to reach out. We're going to Michigan. When is it, brother?
Next week.
Going to Michigan next week. But it's connected to Flint and the water as well as Detroit, Arab community, trade union movement. I've been to Detroit already 2 or 3 times with UAW during the strike. That I was very much concerned about workers being treated fairly. And then the young people of all colors, very much so. Even when we were in Utah, it was at the University of Utah. That was primarily young people. And so yes, we do have we've got folk on the ground, and part of our arsenal is zero in on particular groups. But most importantly, we want a universal message. I am resisting this notion of reducing prudence to simply Machiavellian strategies for various interest groups. I do not believe that politics in a democratic experiment is reducible simply to the calculation of interest groups and their interests. If we don't have vision, principles, ideals, integrity, then I still think it's insufficient. It's too narrow.
Krista Case-Bryant from the Monitor, to your right.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. This has been really interesting. You talked about the moral and civic decay of America. I'm curious what your perspective is on the media. We're all journalists here this morning, and we've been under a lot of criticism over the last several years, particularly since Trump became president. And what do you think of the current standards of the media? Do you think the media has a role to play in helping the country get going more in the direction that you're looking for it to go?
Well, one, I cannot conceive of there being a high-quality public conversation in the United States without there being high-quality journalists who are helping shape that conversation. Journalism, like any other site and sphere in the United States, has become too money-driven, become too commodified, become too corporatized, and become too preoccupied with isolated groups' concerns rather than concerns that help bring people together. So that it's fascinating that, what has happened, in the last 50 years is that you've had democratization and commodification going hand in hand. Democratization is a beautiful thing. Commodification is dumbing down. And by dumbing down, I mean the shift from discourse of ideas, arguments, stories, vision to preoccupation of interest and what's the strategy and tactic to make sure we can make money for this as it ties to this group and how this group is affected vis-a-vis our bottom line, which is economic. And so I think it's been very, very sad to see the journalistic standards reduced, as in every sphere in our society. That's not to say that there are not courageous and visionary journalists, but they have to cut so radically against the grain. We were talking about the shift in 2006 with Christian Science Monitor. I'm very nostalgic about the days when I could walk the streets of Cambridge and steal away in the reading room and read the Christian Science Monitor with my hands. I said, I'm old school, you're nostalgic, you need to grow up, it's a new day. Yes, it is a new day. I understand that. Everything new is not positive. Everything past is not good either. But you have to make critical judgments in what is going on. What are the forces that are pushing journalism in a certain kind of direction, you see? Why is it that the mainstream corporate media is losing its credibility and its legitimacy? It's not just Trump's ugly rhetoric, which has been vicious in terms of his attacks on the liberal corporate media. That's one factor. But the other factor is that liberal corporate media, like Henry James reminded Robert Louis Stevenson, had its own blindnesses. And we should never forget that a deeper issue here is the professional managerial class is losing its legitimacy in the eyes of large numbers of our citizens. The culture of arrogance, of condescension, which is a culture of professionalism. To be educated, to be a professional, to go to university is associated with arrogance, condescension, and the vast majority of our fellow citizens never set foot in a college. So you just think to yourself, spend with fellow citizens who never went to college. I mean, that's a question you all have to answer yourself. But that just shows the silo that you're in. It shows the bubble that you might be in. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about some journalist somewhere in America. But I mean, that has to be acknowledged. And that's something that Trump and the neo-fascists seized. Because those who don't go to college know economically they have been the losers of corporate globalization. They have been the losers. There's no doubt about that. And they want some visibility. Here comes the neo-fascist Pied Piper. I'll make you visible. And then you get the pseudo-populism and the corruption and the lies and the mendacity and even criminality. But that's what fascism has always done, you see. It just, America has its own distinctive way of doing that, you see. I know that's a long answer to your question.
Thank you.
So we have a few minutes till 10. Can you stay a little bit
I'll
after?
stay as long as you like,
so we won't keep you too long.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to just ask you quickly, there was a poll out this week that found that nearly 1 in 5 black voters, so 17% of black voters, would vote for Donald Trump. And that's a huge increase from 2020 when Trump won 8% of the black vote. So what's going on?
Well, I mean, it just reminds us that skin pigmentation is not a determination of wisdom, courage, and moral clarity and insight. Something else mediates that. Now, what are the reasons why so many black folk, especially the black brothers rather than the black sisters? Because we should be very clear, and I want to say this for the press, that it was primarily the black woman's vote that pushed Trump's fascist threat away, supporting Biden. Very important to keep in mind. I mean, we black brothers played a role, but it was 98% or something like that for black women, you see. Crucial, you see. And now we don't know what the reasons are. It could be the hyper-masculinity that they see in Trump. You know, you got a whole wave of young black brothers who are in love with Scarface. Scarface is another gangster, more vicious even than Trump and so forth, tied to various youth culture, elements in youth culture and so forth. And so that could be one element. The other one could be the fact that the Democratic Party is associated with the invention and the creation of mass incarceration regime, which I consider a crime against humanity. I've taught in prisons for 41 years. You see, and Biden, of course, was a major architect of that and bragged about it for 27 years. And apologized when he ran the second time. And what did Trump do? Well, he let out many young black brothers. They projected. And then here comes Kanye West, folk who were highly popular. And what was his wife's name?
Kim Kardashian.
Kardashian, another was put it out there. Trump's letting out these black folk, these black men. Wow. What did the Democrats do? They're super predators. Throw away the key. Different people's perceptions on the ground. That could be another factor. But I don't think I have any definitive answer as to why more and more black folk are opting for Trump, especially black men. But I think those are two factors. And I think, again, you know, they're just so frustrated at the alternative. Definitely. I think, I hope that I'll be able to have some kind of positive impact to see their levels of frustration rechanneled in my campaign as opposed to being channeled in Trump's campaign. That's part of the challenge of the campaign.
So my friend Nadine has another question for you.
Sure.
For a
I want
moment.
to take you back to international politics.
Absolutely.
And I just was wondering, again, as president, how would you deal with Iran and Putin and Russia?
Well, first we got to tell the truth. We've got to tell the truth that Iran has fascist policies. They've been crushing a very magnificent movement, woman life freedom, authoritarian to the core, the subjugation of dissident voices, and so And we have to be very clear in terms of where we stand morally vis-a-vis their regime. That's not just empty name calling, it's just being honest and candid as to where we're coming from. What does that mean in terms of their possibility of nuclear capacity and so forth, you see? Well, we'd have to have some very intense diplomatic talks based on the candid assessment of where we're coming from. You see? And that would be true in terms of its connection to, Hezbollah and its various proxies that are operating in the area. I mean, one of the complicated issues here for someone like myself, of course, is that I am in deep and profound solidarity with any oppressed peoples. So that in the Middle East, I'm in deep solidarity with Palestinian brothers and sisters, but Iran is providing the monies for both support of Palestinian resistance and especially Hamas. But see, I'm not a fan of Hamas. You see, I believe any terrorist organization that kills innocent people are immoral or criminal. That's Hamas. It could be Israeli Defense Forces. It could be the U.S. Army. It could be the Guatemalan Army. It could be the Ethiopian Army across the board. So that so often I've got to push my Muslim brothers and sisters and tell them, you can't be silent about Iran and make noises about Palestinians without being morally inconsistent. You've got to be in solidarity with folk who are suffering across the board. They say, no, this is realpolitik. This is realpolitik. This is how politics operate. I said, I'm not naive. I understand that. I understand that. That doesn't mean that has the last word for me. That doesn't mean that that's the only context, the only lens through which I look at the world.
What about Russia? Do you fund Ukraine? What about NATO? Do you stay in NATO?
No.
No,
I'm
pull out of
with
NATO?
George Kennan. I'm with the great George Kennan in that regard. He used to live around the corner from me in Princeton. He had called for the disbanding of NATO. Then his finest mind, international relations in the 20th century in American empire. He called for the disbanding because it was defensive. He said, we no longer need it. Warsaw Pact is gone. The Soviet Union is gone. Empire is gone. We no longer need it. We don't need to be offensive. All we can do is to poke the bear. All we can do is provoke the Russian Federation, which itself repressive, right, regimenting. Putin's been against us for it's hard to even count the number of years, right? But when we promised Gorbachev that we would not move 1 inch, and we end up right on the border, you see, then we're in a different situation, you see. And why? Because they're concerned about their security. In the same way the United States would be concerned if there were Russian missiles in Mexico or Russian missiles in Canada. We'd probably have a replay of 1962 Cuba. That's how empires behave, be it American empire, Russian empire, whatever. The Russian empire is so wounded, its economy is so weak, that it makes it even more dangerous. And so how do we speak to the suffering of the Ukrainian folk? And you speak to that suffering in terms of, again, not promoting a military solution in war. It's got to be diplomatic. Russian troops have to leave. And there's got to be ways in which Russia can be assured for their security and safety, even as we tell the truth about the repression within their own wounded empire within the Russian Federation.
Okay, last question. Annette Meiritz from Handelsblatt, another German.
Oh, we got two. I didn't realize that. Yes, absolutely. We welcome you. Well, I don't speak on authority in the country, but we welcome you in the country.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope the question hasn't been raised yet, but so in Europe, progressive politicians like Bernie Sanders, Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, they're very popular there, still are. So do left-wing progressive politicians groups already reach out to you to intensify the connection between those movements on both sides of the Atlantic? Is it already happening? And if I may, there are concerns about foreign interference on those elections from China and from Russia. Do you share those concerns?
Well, I think, the world is so globalized now, there's always going to be some foreign presence in these elections. There's just no doubt. It's inescapable. We still had to keep track of it. It becomes excessive and extravagant. It has to be called into question. But it's inescapable. In the same way the United States plays roles in elections all around the world, in Latin America, Middle East, and so forth. I would like to see more connection and solidarity with progressives around the world. That would be a beautiful thing. But progressives are like any other coming together. You know, there's a lot of fratricide. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of conflict in that regard. And that's just par for the course. That's par for the course. See, part of the challenge is that, you know, you got so many one or two or three issue leftists. You see, so not enough one want to talk about patriarchy. Not enough want to talk about reproductive rights. Not enough want to talk about the subjugation of women. Some just want to talk about class. Others just want to talk about race. Hardly any of them really want to talk about empire. That was my struggle with my dear brother Bernie, who I love deeply and always will have a deep love for him. But we used to fight over empire. He could never understand why I supported BDS. I said, well, we need nonviolent resistance against Israeli occupation. We've got to come up with nonviolent ways of doing that. He said, well, no, that's going too far. So we would debate about it. We talked about Africa on the continent. Not enough stress. Okay, why? Because he was hitting Wall Street, you know, and he got that speech down pat, and I was resonating with it. But when it came to these other issues, he was not hitting it too hard. Well, everybody's who they are, not somebody else. But this is true for progressive organizations as well. In Europe, it would be the same thing. Europe has its own empires that are striking back. You see, look at the Netherlands. Who would have thought that the city of the great Spinoza of Amsterdam would be moving so far right? Who would ever conceive of that? Sweden, where my beloved mother-in-law lives. I was just there this summer. Who would think that they'd have a neo-fascist movement escalating, intensifying? That was all of Parma. That was a democratic socialist. That's a social democrat. No, things change. History is unpredictable.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much for coming.
Thank
Very
you
interesting. A pleasure to meet you.
But thank you for your years of putting in for Christian Science. Sister Linda, I'm serious, though.
Thank you.
Very much so.
All right.
Very much so.
All right.
Thank you.